The Dominion was a shadow across the stars. Their ships moved like black storms, swallowing worlds, burning cities, and erasing entire species. Every race that resisted them was broken. Their fleets were endless, their power unstoppable. For a long time, humanity believed they could fight back. But Earth had fallen. Mars was gone. The colonies were scattered. And the human fleet was nothing more than broken steel and old ghosts. In the quiet edge of a dying system, a single human ship drifted. It was called the Resolute. Once it had been a proud warship. Now its armor was rusted, its engines groaned, and its weapons were outdated. The paint was peeling, the lights flickered, and the hull was patched together with whatever scraps the crew could find. It was the last ship defending a forgotten colony, a place so small and poor that even the Dominion barely noticed it. Inside the ship, the crew moved with tired steps. Every corridor smelled of oil and smoke. Wires hung from the ceilings and bulkheads carried scars of old battles. The Resolute was not a place of glory. It was a place of survival. The men and women who served on it were not heroes from stories. They were survivors, worn, scarred, and haunted by the faces of those they had already lost. At the center of it all was Captain Darius. He was a man with iron-gray hair and eyes that carried the weight of too many battles. He stood on the bridge, staring at the stars beyond the cracked glass of the viewport. He had once commanded a fleet. Now he commanded this single rusting ship. Around him, his crew worked in silence. Each of them knew what was coming, because the Dominion had found them. Alarms whispered through the ship. On the radar, blips appeared, first one, then a dozen, then hundreds. The Dominion Armada had entered the system. Their ships were sleek, black, and bristling with weapons. They moved in perfect formation, like predators circling prey. Against such power, the Resolute was nothing more than a relic. Lieutenant Mira sat at the tactical console. She was young, her face pale but determined. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she counted the incoming ships. "Hundreds, Captain," she said softly, her voice trembling. "They brought an entire fleet." Chief Engineer Holt stood in the corner, wiping grease from his hands. He was an older man, his uniform torn and patched, his hands scarred from years of fixing broken engines with nothing but stubbornness and hope. He gave a dry laugh. "One ship against hundreds. I always wanted to die doing something impossible." No one laughed with him. The crew stared at their captain. Some eyes were filled with fear. Others burned with quiet defiance. They all knew this ship could not stand against such a force. Even firing a single shot seemed foolish. Yet doing nothing would mean death anyway. The Dominion commander spoke across the open channel. The voice was cold, mechanical, stripped of emotion. "Human vessel," it said. "You are obsolete. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Resist and your suffering will echo with the rest of your dying race." Silence filled the bridge. The words pressed against their hearts like a knife. The Dominion had mocked them, had called them relics of a dead species. And maybe they were. Captain Darius turned slowly, looking at every face on the bridge. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw something else. He saw the spark of anger. He saw the ember of defiance. He saw the same fire that had carried humanity across the stars long ago, before the Dominion ever came. He stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but every word cut through the silence. "This ship may be old. Our guns may be weak. Our hull may be breaking. But we are still here. And as long as we are here, humanity is not finished." The crew straightened. Mira bit her lip, her hands gripping the controls tighter. Holt looked at the captain and gave a slow nod. Around them, the tired crew lifted their heads. The words were not grand. They were not the words of a king or a savior. But they were human words, and they carried weight. The Dominion ships drew closer, their weapons glowing with power. The stars seemed to darken as the Armada filled the sky. The Resolute was a speck before giants, a single candle before a storm. But in that moment, the crew no longer saw themselves as broken. They saw themselves as defiant. On the bridge, Mira whispered almost to herself, "Maybe we can't win, but we can fight." Captain Darius's voice was steady as he gave the first order. "Bring us closer." The crew obeyed. Engines roared, groaning like wounded beasts as the old ship began to move. The Dominion fleet was waiting, their weapons locked, their power unmatched. Yet the Resolute, patched and rusted, moved forward like a lone wolf stepping into the jaws of lions. No one spoke. No one breathed. Every second stretched like an eternity. The stars outside seemed to hold their breath too, as if waiting for the first spark. And as the Dominion's armada prepared to fire, the humans aboard the Resolute braced themselves. This was not just another battle. This was not just survival. This was the moment when one rusty ship stood in the path of an empire. The first light of enemy fire began to glow across the void, and the crew held their ground. The war for humanity's soul had just begun. The Dominion fleet spread across the stars like a black storm. Their ships gleamed with cold fire, engines burning bright, weapons aimed and ready. Against them, the Resolute looked like a drifting shadow, a forgotten wreck left to rust. Yet inside that wreck, hearts still beat, hands still moved, and the will to fight still burned. On the bridge, Captain Darius stood tall. His jaw was hard, his eyes locked on the sea of enemy ships. He had faced death before, but never like this. Around him, his crew worked with quiet urgency. Their ship creaked as if it too understood the impossible task ahead. Lieutenant Mira's fingers danced over the tactical console. She was the youngest officer on board, no more than 23. Her dark hair was tied back and her eyes never left the glowing screens. She scanned the Dominion fleet, tracing their patterns, memorizing every movement. She was quick, sharp, but her breath caught in her throat when she saw the size of the Armada. She whispered under her breath, "How can one ship fight so many?" No one answered her. Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Holt slammed a wrench against a stuck valve. Sparks flew, smoke filled the air, but the old man barely flinched. He had lived more years than most of the crew combined, and he had given every one of those years to ships like this. His hands were scarred, his lungs burned with oil and ash, but his spirit was stubborn. He muttered to the machine as if it could hear him. "Come on, girl. Just hold together a little longer. You're all we've got." The rest of the crew scattered across the ship. Gunners, medics, navigators, each of them broken in their own way. Some had lost families when Earth burned. Some had fled colonies now turned to dust. None of them were soldiers by choice. They were survivors dragged into war, holding onto scraps of hope. For a moment, the ship fell silent as if the crew itself was holding its breath. Then the Dominion's voice returned. It was calm, cold, and mocking. "Human vessel," the alien commander said. "Your resistance is meaningless. You are a relic of a failed race. Surrender and your end will be swift." Laughter, low and bitter, broke out in the engine room. Holt spat onto the deck and shook his head. "Swift, eh? I'd rather take my time and make them bleed for it." Back on the bridge, Mira's hands shook. She remembered her brother's last words before their colony fell. "Don't let them take everything." She blinked away the memory and steadied her voice. "Captain, they're probing our defenses. They'll test us before they crush us." Darius turned to her. "Good. Let them come." His voice carried through the ship like steel. The crew lifted their heads, their eyes sharp again. They had no illusions. They knew the Dominion could erase them with a single command. But those words, calm, firm, human, gave them strength. The first wave came. Sleek frigates darted forward, black hulls gleaming. They fired warning shots, beams of green fire streaking across the void. The Resolute shook, alarms screaming, sparks leaping from broken panels. The crew scrambled, sealing bulkheads, patching leaks with their bare hands. "Shields at 20%, Mira shouted, her voice tight with fear. "Then make 20 feel like 100, Darius replied. On the gunnery deck, Ensign Keller gripped the old cannons. His hands were slick with sweat, his heart racing. The cannons were antiques, slower than Dominion weapons, weaker by far. But they were human-made, and human hands knew how to twist weakness into strength. "Target lock acquired," Keller shouted. The Resolute fired. The cannons roared, belching fire into the darkness. One Dominion frigate, too confident, too close, exploded in a burst of light. For a heartbeat, the crew froze. Then cheers erupted through the ship. They had drawn blood. The Dominion fleet reacted with cold efficiency. More frigates broke formation, moving in for the kill. The sky outside lit up with fire as energy blasts rained down. Hull plates shattered, alarms screamed, and the Resolute groaned like a wounded beast. Down in engineering, Holt's hands moved faster than his mind. He ripped wires with his teeth, twisted bolts with bleeding fingers, patching holes with whatever scraps he could find. "Not today," he whispered. "You'll hold, girl. Not today." On the bridge, Mira's eyes widened. "Captain, more ships incoming." "They're surrounding us." Captain Darius leaned forward, his voice a growl. "Then we break their circle." The crew stared at him, wide-eyed. "Break the circle? Against hundreds of ships?" But Darius's tone was unshakable. He turned to Mira. "Find me their weak spot. There's always a gap. Always." Mira scanned, her mind racing, tracing the enemy's formation. For a moment, doubt clouded her face. Then her eyes lit up. There on the left flank. Their formation is too tight. Their fire zones overlap. If we move fast, we can slip through before they adjust. Darius gave a sharp nod. Helm, set course. Holt, give me every drop of speed she's got. In the engine room, Holt barked a laugh. She'll tear herself apart, but fine, let's see what the old girl can do. He slammed the controls, and the engines screamed like wild beasts unleashed. The Resolute lurched forward, cutting across the firestorm. Dominion ships opened fire, beams slicing past by mere meters. The hull burned, bulkheads cracked, but the ship pushed on, every bolt rattling, every joint screaming. The Dominion commander's voice cut across the comms again, sharper now. Human vessel, your struggle is meaningless. You delay nothing, you change nothing. Darius stood tall, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. His voice was low but filled with fire. If we change nothing, then why do you sound afraid? The bridge fell silent. Even Mira felt a chill at those words. The Dominion had power. The Dominion had fleets. But the humans had something else, something no machine could measure. The Resolute broke through the first line, slipping into the shadows of the debris field beyond. Behind them, the Dominion ships adjusted, their weapons burning brighter. The chase had only begun. The crew looked at their captain. They knew this was madness. They knew they could not survive forever. Yet for the first time they felt something stronger than fear. They felt the taste of defiance. And as the Dominion prepared to crush them, the humans of the Resolute whispered the same thought in their hearts. Let them come. The void was silent, but silence in space was never peace. Silence meant the enemy was watching. Silence meant danger was building. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew stared at the swarm of Dominion ships that moved like wolves circling a wounded prey. The human ship had slipped into the debris field, hiding among shattered rocks and twisted metal. But every person on board knew the Dominion would not wait long. They would come, and they would come to kill. Captain Darius stood at the center of the bridge. His face was calm, but his heart hammered like a war drum. His crew's eyes flicked to him for strength, and he gave it without words. A single look from him told them what they already knew. This was not the end. Not yet. Lieutenant Mira hunched over her console, watching the patterns of Dominion ships moving outside. Her sharp mind tracked every orbit, every scan pulse, every flicker of their weapon systems. She saw the Armada's power, the way their black ships glided through space with perfect precision. Yet she also saw something else. Flaws, tiny cracks in their confidence. They're not sending the fleet, Mira said quietly, almost to herself. Just a few frigates. They think we're not worth the effort. A bitter smile touched Captain Darius's lips. Good. Let them think that. The ship creaked around them, old metal straining with every shift of power. Chief Engineer Holt's voice crackled through the comms from the engine room. Captain, I've patched her as best I can. She'll fight, but don't expect miracles. She's an old girl, not a god. Old gods were just mortals who refused to fall, Darius replied. The first Dominion frigates swept into the debris field, their black hulls gleaming, their weapons glowing with green light. They moved with practiced arrogance, weaving through asteroids as if the field belonged to them. Their commander's voice echoed again across the comms, sharp with contempt. Rusty human vessel, your tricks delay nothing. Submit to your extinction. The crew listened in silence. Then Holt laughed over the comms, a harsh sound full of smoke and defiance. Extinction? You'll choke on our rust first. The bridge erupted in faint smiles. Even in the shadow of death, they could still laugh. The frigates drew closer. Their sensors swept across the wreckage, hunting for signs of the human ship. The Resolute stayed still, drifting among the rocks, power low, guns silent. Every crew member held their breath, waiting. Then Captain Darius spoke, his voice a low growl. Not yet. Not yet. His eyes narrowed as one frigate passed too close, its hull brushing the edge of an asteroid. Now the Resolute came alive. Engines roared, old guns spat fire, and hidden torpedo bays cracked open. The first volley tore through the void, striking the nearest frigate before its shields could rise. The ship exploded in a storm of fire and twisted metal, the shockwave lighting the dark field like a second sun. The bridge shook with the roar of their own cannons. Ensign Keller shouted from the gunnery deck, "Direct hit!" "We got one." Cheers erupted, raw and wild. For the first time in too long, the humans had struck back. For the first time they had drawn blood from the wolves, but the fight had only begun. The other Dominion frigates spun in fury, weapons blazing. Green beams slashed through the debris, cutting asteroids in half, ripping holes in the void. The Resolute dodged and twisted, her old engines screaming under the strain. Holt's voice shouted over the comms. "You'll tear her apart, Captain. She can't dance like this forever. Then she'll dance until she burns," Darius snapped back. Mira's eyes locked onto her screen, tracking enemy patterns. "Another frigate coming from above, angle 37, range closing fast." "Keller, fire!" Darius barked. The gunnery decks thundered. A storm of shells and torpedoes streaked out, slamming into the second frigate's flank. Its shields flickered, then cracked under the relentless barrage. With a final burst, the Dominion vessel shattered into pieces. "Two down," Mira cried. The crew roared again, but the moment was cut short. The debris field exploded with incoming fire as the surviving frigates unleashed everything they had. Explosions rattled the hull, consoles sparked, and the ship's lights flickered. "Shields failing," Mira shouted. "Hull breach on lower deck." Medics scrambled, sealing compartments, dragging the wounded out of the smoke. Holt cursed loudly in engineering, his hands a blur of motion as he fought to keep the engines alive. Sparks rained around him. Wires burst and fire licked at the walls. Still he worked, muttering to the ship like an old prayer. "Hold on, girl. Just a little longer. Just one more fight." On the bridge, the crew clung to their posts. The Resolute spun through the storm, battered but unbroken. The Dominion frigates pressed closer, determined to finish what they had started. Captain Darius stood like a stone in the chaos. His voice was steady, sharp. "Line up the last one. Make them feel it." Mira's hands flew across her console. Target locked. Weak spot in their rear thrusters. "Keller, fire everything." The cannons roared one last time, and a torrent of fire erupted from the Resolute. The blast ripped into the third frigate, tearing through its engines, igniting its fuel reserves. The ship vanished in a blaze of fire that lit up the battlefield. Silence followed. The last echoes of the explosion faded into the void. 3 Dominion frigates, destroyed. 1 rusty human ship, still standing. The bridge was quiet, filled only with the sound of heavy breathing and crackling consoles. The crew looked at each other, faces smeared with sweat and ash, eyes wide with disbelief. They had done it. They had won, but the victory was small and they all knew it. Mira's voice was soft, almost trembling. "Captain, the rest of the fleet is moving. Hundreds of ships. They're coming." Outside, the darkness shifted. The Dominion Armada stirred, its massive flagship turning, its weapons charging. The little victory had stung them, and now the full weight of their fury would fall. Captain Darius's eyes never left the stars. His face was calm, his voice steady. "So be it. We've shown them one thing tonight." The crew waited, hearts racing. That humanity will not go quietly. And as the glow of the Dominion's main cannons lit the darkness, the Resolute prepared to face the storm. The stars lit up with fire. The Dominion fleet unleashed its fury, and the void itself seemed to tremble. Green beams of energy streaked through space, smashing into asteroids, shattering stone into clouds of dust and flame. The Resolute twisted desperately among the wreckage, her old hull groaning with every violent turn. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Consoles sparked, and the smell of burning wires filled the air. Mira's voice cut through the chaos. "Shields are gone. Hull integrity at 50%. Captain Darius stood firm at the center, his eyes never leaving the storm outside. His face was stone, but deep inside he knew the truth. His ship could not withstand another direct volley. They had bloodied the wolves, but now the pack was closing in. Down in engineering, Holt slammed his fist against the control panel, cursing as flames licked around him. "She's falling apart, Captain. I can patch, I can twist, I can pray, but I can't work miracles." Through the comms, Darius's voice came steady and unyielding. "Then give me one more miracle, Holt, just one more." The ship shook again as another blast tore across its side. Metal screamed, bulkheads cracked, and a gaping wound opened on Deck 5. Alarms wailed, oxygen venting into space, lives slipping away into the dark. "Seal the breach," Mira shouted. Crew members rushed, dragging emergency shields into place, their hands trembling, their bodies battered. Some didn't make it. Their screams cut short as they were pulled into the void, faces forever lost to the stars. Darius's jaw tightened. Every life lost burned into him, carving scars deeper than any wound. But he could not stop. Not now. Mira, he said, his voice low but sharp. Options. She bit her lip, scanning the enemy fleet. The Dominion ships were everywhere, sleek, black, unbroken. Their formation was perfect, their fire relentless. She shook her head. We can't fight them head-on. Not like this. Then we don't fight them head-on, Darius said. We fight from the shadows, her eyes widened. She understood. The debris field, the shattered remains of old battles, was not just a graveyard. It was cover. It was a shield. It was a place to vanish. The asteroids, she whispered. If we cut power, drift among them, we can hide. Holt's voice snarled over the comms. Cut power? You'll freeze us solid and make us blind. Better blind than dead, Darius said. Holt grunted, then muttered, fine. But if this tub doesn't wake back up, I'll haunt you in the afterlife. The order was given. The Resolute's engines went silent, her lights dimmed, her guns quiet. The ship drifted like a corpse among the broken rocks. Around her, the Dominion's beams tore through the field, lighting up clouds of dust and debris. But the human ship slipped deeper into shadow, wrapped in silence, hidden in the graveyard of the dead. The crew held their breath. The hum of the engines was gone. The warmth of the heaters faded. Cold crept through the corridors. Only the faint red glow of emergency lights remained. The ship became a ghost waiting. Outside, Dominion ships prowled. Their scanners swept the wreckage, their weapons fired into the dark. But the field was vast, endless, and the humans were small. The predator searched, but the prey had vanished. On the bridge, Mira's voice was barely a whisper. They're moving past us. They think we're gone. Darius's eyes narrowed. Good. Let them believe it. Minutes stretched like hours. Every thud of an asteroid against the hull, every flicker of static across the comms made the crew flinch. Sweat dripped, breaths shook, but no one spoke. In silence, they waited. Then came the moment. A Dominion destroyer drifted too close, its flank exposed as it scanned the wreckage. Its shields flickered low, confident no threat remained. Darius's voice cut the silence like a blade. Now the Resolute came alive. Engines roared, guns thundered, and torpedoes streaked out of the shadows. The first volley tore into the destroyer's side, ripping it open in a blaze of fire. The second volley finished it, turning the sleek predator into a burning wreck. The bridge shook with the force of their own attack, and cheers erupted from the crew. For a moment, hope surged again, but hope came at a cost. The ambush revealed their position, and the Dominion responded with fury. A dozen ships turned, their weapons glowing brighter, their scanners locking on. The graveyard became a storm of fire once more. Mira, course, Darius shouted. Deeper into the field, she cried. We can use the bigger asteroids for cover. The Resolute dove between massive chunks of rock, weaving through narrow passages, scraping against stone. Enemy beams split the asteroids apart, sending shards of molten stone flying in every direction. The ship shook, battered, bleeding sparks and smoke, but still she moved. Down in engineering, Holt clung to the controls, sweat pouring down his face. You're killing her, Captain. She's not built for this. She'll hold, Darius said, though his voice was tight. She has to hold. Through the chaos, Mira saw another opening. Captain, there, ahead. A hollow asteroid big enough to hide in. Take us in, Darius ordered. The ship roared forward, slipping into the cavernous hollow of the shattered rock. Darkness swallowed them, and for a moment they were safe. The enemy's fire raged outside, but the asteroid's shell held. On the bridge, silence returned. The crew looked at each other, faces pale, eyes wide. They had survived, barely. But Mira's voice broke the silence. Captain, they'll find us. It's only a matter of time. Darius stood tall, his face grim but resolute. Then we make sure, when they do, they pay a price they'll never forget. Outside, the Dominion flagship turned slowly, its weapons charging, its presence filling the void like a shadow over the stars. The storm was far from over, and deep inside the hollow rock, a single rusty ship prepared for the next strike. The hollow asteroid trembled as Dominion blasts hammered its surface. Each strike shook the Resolute where it hid, rattling every bolt and seam. Dust rained down from the cavern walls, coating consoles and clinging to the crew's sweat. The ship was battered, scarred, and bleeding sparks from half its systems. Yet inside, the crew clung to life, eyes fixed on their captain. Captain Darius stood tall at the center of the bridge, his uniform torn, his face smeared with soot. His voice was low but sharp, steady as steel. "They think we're broken. They think we're afraid. They're wrong." Lieutenant Mira sat at her console, her hands trembling but quick. She scanned the Dominion fleet outside the asteroid. The flagship loomed in the distance, a black leviathan surrounded by its swarm of escorts. Its weapon ports glowed, building power for something far greater than the smaller ships had fired. Her breath caught. "Captain, they're preparing their superweapon. If they fire it, the whole asteroid will collapse. We'll be buried alive." A hush fell across the bridge. The Dominion weren't just hunting them anymore. They wanted to erase them completely, to turn the asteroid into a tomb. Down in engineering, Holt wiped blood from his brow. He had been thrown against a bulkhead when the last blast shook the ship. His old hands still moved, though they trembled now from exhaustion. He growled into the comms. "Engines are coughing, weapons are spitting, and the reactor's one good sneeze from blowing us all to dust." "What's the plan, Captain?" Darius's eyes narrowed. "We strike before they fire." Mira's head snapped up. "Strike against the flagship?" "Yes," Darius said simply. "We can't run. We can't hide. The only path left is through them." The crew exchanged stunned looks. It was madness. The flagship dwarfed their ship, its armor thick, its weapons unmatched. Even a fleet of human warships had once failed to bring one down. And here they were, a single rusted vessel planning the impossible. Silence hung heavy. Then a young voice spoke. It was Ensign Keller from the gunnery deck. His tone was quiet but firm. "If we're going to die, let's make them bleed first." Something shifted in the air. Fear did not vanish, but it changed. It hardened into resolve. The crew straightened. Their eyes burned again. They knew the odds, but they were human, and humans had never bowed easily. The plan was desperate. Mira laid it out, her voice quick, urgent. "Their weapon array takes time to charge. If we hit the power conduits beneath it, we can delay or even disable it. But to do that, we need to get close. Too close." "Then close is where we'll go," Darius said. The Resolute roared to life, engines screaming as Holt pushed them harder than ever before. The ship burst from the asteroid's hollow, debris trailing like fire in its wake. The Dominion fleet turned at once, weapons blazing, fury unleashed. The first volley slammed into them. The ship buckled, bulkheads cracked, and crew were thrown against walls. Alarms howled, sparks lit the corridors like fireflies. A medic shouted as he dragged a bleeding sailor across the floor. "Forward cannons, fire," Darius commanded. The gunnery decks thundered, the old cannons belching flame into the void. Shots tore into a Dominion frigate, crippling it, sending it spinning into another ship. The humans cheered, but the celebration was short. A massive blast ripped through Deck 3, flames swallowing the corridor. Mira's console lit red. "Hull breach! We're losing them!" Darius didn't flinch. He forced the words out. "Seal the deck." Voices screamed over the comms, men and women begging, pounding at sealed doors. The captain's order meant leaving them behind, letting the vacuum take them. But it had to be done. If they didn't seal the deck, the entire ship would vent into space. The screams faded. Silence followed. Mira's eyes filled with tears. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to keep working. Darius said nothing, though the weight of that choice carved deeper lines into his face. Still, they pressed forward. The Dominion flagship grew larger in the viewport, its glowing weapon array sparking with power. In engineering, Holt coughed blood into his hand. He leaned on the console, his body failing but his spirit unbroken. His eyes flicked to the reactor controls. Overloaded, unstable, dangerous. A thought formed in his mind. A final gift. He opened the comms. "Captain," his voice was ragged. "The engines won't hold. The guns won't last. But the reactor, I can overload it. Turn this ship into a bomb." The bridge froze. Darius's jaw tightened. "You'll die." Holt gave a crooked smile, though no one could see it. "We're all dying. But if this old ship's going down, let it take a piece of their empire with it." For a moment, the captain said nothing. His throat was tight, his heart heavy. Holt was more than an engineer. He was the soul of this ship, the man who had kept her alive when no one else believed she could keep fighting. And now, he was offering his life so that humanity might have one last chance. Darius finally spoke, his voice breaking like steel under strain. "Holt, make it count." The old man laughed softly. "I always do." He closed the comms and set to work, his hands steady despite the weakness in his body. Sparks lit his face as he pulled wires, twisted valves, and fed the dying reactor with everything it had left. On the bridge, Mira whispered, "He's going to save us." "No," Darius said quietly. "He's going to save humanity." The Dominion flagship loomed ahead, its superweapon glowing brighter moments from firing. The Resolute, cracked and burning, surged toward it. Holt's sacrifice would give them one chance, one impossible chance to strike at the heart of the enemy. The crew braced themselves. Every soul aboard knew what was coming. Outside, the Dominion commander watched, certain of victory. But deep inside the broken hull of a human ship, sacrifice burned brighter than fear. And as Holt's hands pressed the final sequence, the reactor screamed to life. The price of defiance was death. But it was a price humanity was willing to pay. The void burned with the echoes of sacrifice. The Resolute had torn through the Dominion's lines, dragging fire and fury in her wake. But Holt was gone. The engineer's last act, overloading the reactor to give the ship a final surge of power, had saved them from being erased by the enemy's superweapon. His voice no longer crackled over the comms. His laughter, his curses, his stubborn faith in the old ship had vanished into silence. But Holt's spirit lived in every shudder of the engines, in every ragged breath of the crew, in every groan of the hull that still clung to life. On the bridge, Captain Darius stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the empty comms panel. Smoke drifted around him, consoles burned with sparks, and the crew looked to him, their faces pale with grief and fear. He swallowed the weight pressing against his chest and forced his voice steady. "Holt gave us one last gift. We don't waste it, not now, not ever." The crew straightened, their grief hardening into resolve. Lieutenant Mira wiped tears from her smoke-stained face, her hands trembling as they hovered over the tactical console. She whispered under her breath, "You stubborn old man. You kept your promise." Then her voice rose sharp and clear. "Captain, I've been tracking the enemy's formations. Holt bought us time, but the Armada is still tightening the noose." "We have one way out." Darius's eyes flicked to her. "Speak." She pulled up the data, the glowing patterns of Dominion ships surrounding them. "Their flagship controls the entire fleet. They're too rigid, too perfect. If we can disrupt their command chain, even for a moment, the others will falter." "That's our window." "Disrupted how?" Ensign Keller asked from the gunnery deck. His hands were raw from gripping the cannons, his voice hoarse from shouting through the battles. "Their flagship's a mountain of steel. We don't have the firepower to scratch it." Mira's eyes burned with fierce light. "We don't need to destroy it. We need to blind it. Their targeting relays, their coordination signals, they pulse through one central node just under the forward plating. If we hit it, the fleet will lose sync. Even for a minute, it'll give us a gap." Darius stepped closer, his voice sharp. "A minute is all we need." The plan was madness. But so was everything since the day Earth fell. The Resolute lurched forward, engines howling as they pushed beyond limits Holt had once sworn were impossible. The ship's hull groaned, panels burst, oxygen hissed from hairline cracks. Still she moved, broken but unyielding. The Dominion fleet swarmed, their fire filling the void like a storm of green lightning. The Resolute twisted and dove between the blasts, scraping past burning wreckage and shattered asteroids. Each hit scarred her deeper. But still she pressed on, dragging herself toward the monstrous shadow of the flagship. On the bridge, Mira's voice was rapid, urgent. "Almost in range. Adjust 5 degrees starboard, Captain. There. Keller!" Darius barked. "Line up the shot." The young gunner's hands shook, but his eyes locked on the glowing node in the distance. He could feel Holt behind him, steadying his aim, whispering old words of grit and stubbornness. Keller's voice cracked as he shouted, "Target locked!" "Fire!" Darius ordered. The cannons thundered, a storm of human fury unleashed in a single desperate volley. Shells tore across the void, streaking toward the node. The Dominion flagship flared its shields, but the blasts hammered through, sparks bursting across its hull. The node flickered, once, twice, then shattered in a burst of light. The Dominion fleet faltered. Ships drifted out of sync, their perfect coordination unraveling. For the first time, their formation cracked. Mira gasped, her hands flying across the console. "It worked! Their targeting systems are offline. The fleet's in chaos!" Cheers erupted through the bridge, raw and wild. For a moment, hope flared like a second sun. But hope burned quick. The Dominion flagship roared to life, its secondary systems igniting. Weapons glowed brighter than ever, its massive cannons turning toward the Resolute. The temporary victory had enraged the beast, and now it would strike with full fury. The Resolute staggered under the renewed barrage. Explosions ripped through the decks, flames swallowed corridors, bodies fell. Medics dragged the wounded through smoke, shouting over the alarms. "Captain," Mira cried. "We can't take another volley." Darius gripped the railing, his knuckles white, his face carved from iron. "Then we don't take another volley. We make this one count." He turned to his crew, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We have one last shot left in us. One chance to show them what humans are made of. Holt gave his life to bring us here. Do you mean to waste it?" The crew roared back, voices hoarse but fierce. "No!" Darius's eyes burned as he gave the order. "Prepare all weapons. Load every shell, every torpedo. We aim for the heart of their beast. If this is our last stand, then let it be remembered." The ship's decks thundered as the last of their ammunition was loaded. Gunners strapped themselves to their posts, bloodied but unbowed. Mira's hands flew, locking targets, her face pale but determined. The Resolute turned, its battered nose aiming directly at the Dominion flagship. Fire licked its hull. Smoke poured from its wounds, but its engines still burned. From the comms, the Dominion commander's voice returned, dripping with cold fury. "Human vessel, you defy inevitability. You cling to scraps of hope. You are already dead." Darius's reply was steady, his eyes fixed on the Leviathan ahead. "If we are dead, then remember this. It was the dead who broke your empire's pride." The Dominion weapons glowed, building to a blinding charge. The Resolute surged forward, weapons armed, her crew ready for one last strike. In that moment, the ship was more than rust and steel. It was every lost world, every burned city, every cry of humanity refusing to be erased, broken but unyielding. The Resolute charged the storm. The Dominion flagship filled the viewport like a black mountain, its armor shining with cold light, its weapons glowing brighter with every passing second. It was more fortress than ship, a floating world of death, and the Resolute, burning, cracked, bleeding sparks into the void, was charging straight toward it. Captain Darius stood at the center of the bridge, his hand gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. His eyes were locked on the beast ahead, all power to the engines. Every drop. The bridge shook as Mira routed the remaining reserves. The lights flickered, and the deck plates groaned as the ship's ancient heart roared louder than ever before. Flames hissed along the walls, smoke choked the air, but the old vessel still moved, faster than it had any right to. Down in the gunnery decks, Ensign Keller wiped blood from his face, his hands steady on the controls. He looked around at the other gunners, their eyes hollow but burning. They all knew this was the end. But it was not an end of surrender. It was an end of choice. He muttered under his breath, "For Earth. For Holt." Then he loaded the last of the shells. The Dominion commander's voice broke through the comms, calm and cruel. "Pitiful humans. You dare to charge? Your ship is broken. Your fight is meaningless." The crew listened, and something like laughter rippled through them. Bitter, sharp, defiant, Mira whispered, almost smiling despite the tears on her face. "If it's meaningless, why are they afraid?" The first volley came from the flagship, massive beams of green fire that lit up the void. The Resolute twisted, scraping through the inferno, shields long gone, armor melting under the blast. Decks buckled, walls tore open, and bodies were thrown into the dark. But still, she flew. Keller's cannons roared in reply. Torpedoes streaked out, smashing into escort ships that dared to bar their path. 2 Dominion destroyers exploded in quick succession, torn apart by the desperate fury of human guns. On the bridge, Mira called out, "We've cleared the line. Only the flagship now." Darius's voice thundered across the comms, reaching every deck, every survivor still clinging to life. "This is it. All weapons fire!" The ship roared like a beast unchained. Every cannon, every torpedo bay, every missile tube unleashed its last breath. A storm of fire crossed the void, hammering the flagship's shields, cracking its armor. The Dominion vessel shook, but it did not fall. The enemy answered with a strike that nearly split the Resolute in half. The bridge went dark for a heartbeat, then came back with flickering red light. Mira was thrown from her chair, blood on her forehead, but she forced herself up, her voice ragged. "We can't take another hit!" Darius's face was hard as stone. "Then we won't. We end this now." He turned to the helm. Ram the flagship. Full speed. The words hung in the air like thunder. No one questioned. No one hesitated. The crew nodded, their eyes fierce. If this was their last act, then it would shake the galaxy. The engine screamed as Holt's final repairs gave them one more burst of life. The Resolute surged forward, a flaming spear against the darkness. The Dominion flagship unleashed everything, beams, missiles, fire raining like the wrath of gods. The Resolute tore through it, battered, burning, but unstoppable. Hull plates ripped away, decks collapsed, but still she flew. Keller laughed wildly as he fired the last of the shells straight into the flagship's face. Take it all! The blast tore through one of the massive gun batteries, flames exploding outward. In engineering, what remained of the crew worked silently, their hands steady even as fire consumed their station. They knew where this road ended. They embraced it. On the bridge, Mira clung to her console, blood dripping onto the keys, her eyes locked on the target ahead. Her voice cracked but carried pride. We're going to hit them. We're really going to hit them. Darius's voice was low, steady, almost calm. If we fall, let them remember we were the ones who stood. The Dominion commander's voice returned, but this time, there was something new in it, a hint of unease. You cannot win. You cannot. The words cut off as the Resolute smashed through the flagship's shields, tearing into its armored hull. Metal shrieked against metal. Explosions tore across both ships as fire engulfed the void. The crew held fast, bracing for the end. Keller shouted one last curse. Mira closed her eyes, whispering her brother's name. Darius stood tall, unflinching as the bridge filled with fire. The Resolute, the old, rusted, broken relic, rammed into the heart of the Dominion's pride. The collision was a sunburst in the dark, a scream of steel and fury that lit the void brighter than 1,000 stars. And in that moment, the humans aboard the ship were not weak. They were not broken. They were giants. The flagship buckled under the impossible strike. Fire raced through its veins, explosions chained across its hull. The Dominion fleet watched in shock as their fortress trembled. The Resolute was gone, torn apart in the blaze. But her death was not silence. It was a roar that echoed across the battlefield. For a heartbeat, there was no Dominion Armada. There was only the memory of one rusty ship that had charged the storm and struck. ChatGPT said, the battlefield was silent. The Dominion Armada, once a wall of black steel and fire, drifted in shock. Where their mighty flagship had loomed, there was now only wreckage. Burning fragments tumbling through the void, twisted metal glowing like dying stars. And at the center of that destruction lay nothing of the Resolute but shards of rust and echoes of her defiance. For a moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The Dominion had never fallen to a single ship. Never. Their fleets crushed empires, their flagships erased worlds. Yet one rusty human vessel, a relic mocked as obsolete, had torn into their heart and split it open. On surviving Dominion channels, static hissed with disbelief. Officers barked orders, commanders screamed for formations, but the fleet faltered. Without the flagship's guiding hand, the precision of their attack unraveled. Their perfect unity cracked, and in that crack, fear seeped through. Far away in scattered human colonies, signals came alive. Miners on frozen moons, farmers on broken worlds, refugees hiding in deep caves, all heard the same transmission. The Resolute rammed the Dominion's flagship. The humans fought. The humans struck back. At first it spread as rumor, whispered from lips trembling with hope. Then it grew louder, carried by stolen comms, by smugglers, by every soul desperate to believe humanity was not finished. In a mining outpost orbiting Titan, a boy who had never seen Earth raised his fist to the sky. They fought, he whispered. We can fight too. On a barren colony where families huddled in shelters, a mother held her daughter close, tears in her eyes. Remember their names, she told the child. Remember there was a ship that did not bow. And beyond humanity, others listened. Alien races long broken under the Dominion's boot stirred at the news. A species on the edge of extinction, its people enslaved for generations, whispered in secret. If the humans can wound the giants, maybe we can rise too. The story of the Resolute spread faster than any Dominion fleet could chase it. Not just a battle, not just an explosion, but a spark. On the battlefield, the Dominion tried to recover. Ships reformed their lines, commanders shouted orders, but something had shifted. Their enemies no longer saw them as gods. They saw them as mortal. They saw them as breakable. Among the Dominion officers, unease rippled. Reports came in from across the galaxy. Riots in labor camps, sabotage in mines, uprisings in cities thought long broken. All of it traced back to one name, the Resolute. But aboard the ship itself, there were no survivors. The crew had given everything. Holt's sacrifice in the reactor, Keller's last volley, Mira's blood on the console, Darius's voice steady until the end. They were gone, but their legacy roared louder than any fleet. And yet, in the scattered debris, a single battered beacon blinked. A black box, cracked but unbroken, pulsed with one final message. Dominion salvage crews retrieved it, expecting silence, but instead, they heard Captain Darius's last words, recorded moments before the collision. "This is Captain Elias Darius of the human vessel Resolute. If you hear this, know that humanity is not finished. You may burn our worlds, you may break our fleets, but we will not vanish. As long as one of us still draws breath, we fight. Remember this, even rust can cut." The message was short, raw, and simple, but when it leaked across the stars, it became fire. Human commanders who had hidden their remnants rallied what ships they had. Colonies once resigned to death sharpened their weapons. Alien eyes looked toward humanity and saw not weakness but defiance. The Dominion fleet, still vast and terrifying, remained. They had numbers, power, worlds at their mercy. But now they had something they had never faced before, doubt. And doubt was poison. The war was far from won. Humanity was still fractured, their fleets broken, their homeworld a memory of ash. But the Dominion had been scarred. Their invincible pride was cracked, their perfect control shaken. In the years to come, the galaxy would speak of many battles. New heroes would rise, new fleets would clash, but none of it would have begun without the rusted ship that dared to charge a storm. Children would whisper its name in bunkers. Fighters would carve it into their hulls. Even enemies would speak it with grudging respect. The Resolute. And though her body was gone, her soul lived on, in every act of defiance, in every spark of rebellion, in every corner of the galaxy where the oppressed whispered, "If they could fight, so can we." The Dominion had the firepower to burn stars. Humanity had nothing but will. But sometimes will was enough to change the course of history. And so the war for the galaxy entered a new chapter. Not because of fleets, not because of empires, but because a single, battered, rusty human ship had refused to bow. In the cold silence of space, where wreckage drifted like ashes on the wind, the echo of that defiance lingered. Not a whisper, not a cry, a roar,